so much to all of you for coming out this morning. It's always great to have faces eager and interested. It was quite a billing for you, Ambassador.
All downhill?
Not at all. I'm excited to talk to you myself. I think anyone who covers foreign policy and has covered your work as a journalist, as an activist, as a scholar, and now as a diplomat, always finds you direct, always finds you quite quotable if you're looking for a good quote from a cabinet member. So I'm now raising expectations.
I think we're just about out of time.
My first question for you, though, did you watch the baseball game or did you watch the debate last night?
There might have been a little flipping between
channel surfing.
And the last half hour of the debate, I confess, it was all baseball, just to see if the Mets could rally.
Well, foreign affairs, foreign policy was the topic at hand. I realize you can't weigh into politics given your job right now. But when you look at how you plan to continue to serve, do you see yourself serving in another administration?
As you can imagine, we're very, very focused on the 15 months that are left. And it does, I mean, it really is starting to feel like a compressed period of time. I have a 6-year-old boy, and we had what's called a Wheels Up party after President Obama left New York after the most recent General Assembly, the 70th anniversary of the UN. And my 6-year-old boy was passing around cards that I stack up for my team that say, we're entering the fourth quarter, important things happen in the fourth quarter. And I walk in, and it's like 10 o'clock at night. I'm thinking, why is my 6-year-old boy up? But he's going around and he's giving everybody fourth quarter cards saying, fourth quarter, fourth quarter. That's kind of how I feel. So that's my focus. And certainly I'm also going to be very focused going forward in the future, spending more time with my kids as well. So we'll see what happens.
Is that going to be in Boston? Go back to academia?
I don't know. I mean, honestly, fourth quarter.
So it's the fourth quarter. You've got quite an agenda.
Yeah.
You look around the world, there's no shortage of topics you could be tackling. What's at the top of your list?
Well, I have the privilege of being at the UN where all the countries of the world convene every day. And we are at a moment, I think, actually in a bipartisan way, most people acknowledge that the problems that are the most daunting have to be solved multilaterally, require burden sharing, require coalitions. So ISIL, climate change, we've had a year in which by leveraging a U.S. investment to tackle Ebola, we were able to mobilize. It's an unheralded, really, success. Once Ebola went away, people stopped focusing on it. But I think it's an example of how an international institution can be used because all the countries are there. And when the president decides to deploy 3,000 troops and invest doctors and health professionals of all kinds, we're able to leverage that to get other countries to do the same thing. So we have done that on ISIL with a 65-country coalition, but we have a set of operational objectives vis-a-vis ISIL that we need to achieve. And the UN has been the place where we've built an architecture to try to stop the flow of financing to terrorists in the field and stop the flow, which has been, as you know, a major issue in Syria and Iraq, and now as ISIL announces chapters in other parts of the world, that architecture needs to be enforced. And that's where, again, the UN can hold, not the UN itself, but we at the UN can hold countries accountable for any deviation from the norms and the standards that we have built here in the last couple of years.
And Iran, of course, given that nuclear accord architecture of that through the UN, it's going to be enforced through that international coalition. Something that just showed up on your desk, Iran's decision to test missiles over the weekend. State Department says that looks like that's in violation of a specific UN ban.
Yes.
What are you going to do about that?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, we have a lot of experience in New York dealing with violations of the UN Security Council resolutions. The resolution banning launches that appear to be like the one that Iran just carried out have been on the books for a long time, and this is not the first time they have done that. So we will, if in fact, again, we're just getting the specifics, but all the indicators are that it would be a violation of the UNSCR. We'll go to the Security Council, present it, and then look at what further steps we can take. One of the really important features in implementation of the recent Iran deal to dismantle Iran's nuclear program is going to have to be enforcement of the resolutions and the standards that remain on the books.
This is a test case,
yes,
in many ways.
It is, and we need other countries to step up. As you know, the P5+1, the reason we were able to get a strong deal that does cut off the pathways to Iran obtaining a nuclear weapon is because the P5+1, the permanent members of the Security Council, which include Russia and China, we were able to stay united, and we need to be united now on enforcement of existing sanctions resolutions.
Big question there, though. The White House has said it doesn't appear to violate the nuclear accord that was just negotiated. Doesn't this violate the spirit, if not the text, of that deal?
I don't even think we need to get to that question. If again, it is the law, the facts are as we believe them to be, it would violate UN Security Council resolutions. So, the deal itself was on a specific set of requirements. The UN Security Council resolutions that remain in place are ones that we need to ensure are enforced.
Mm-hmm. But you still see it going into effect this weekend, October 18th, as scheduled?
I think we have to walk and chew gum at the same time. We have to, in New York, make sure that there's accountability for any violation of the UN Security Council resolutions.
All right, we'll be watching, I'm sure. As you say, it's an important test case. I want to talk to some of what your approach has been to this job. We are talking a lot about leading with purpose, and when people describe your role within the administration and how you've approached this job as ambassador, they often refer back to the job you had previously, how activism, how humanizing conflict has really influenced your approach. You're one of the few U.S. officials who comes face-to-face with Russia on an almost daily basis, and you have said they have really held the agenda hostage at the UN. What is it like for you, day in, day out, watching the agenda you are pushing just get held hostage by Russia? How do you deal with that?
It's actually, it's a mixed picture. It's a little more mixed than that. I think there's no question that on one of the gravest foreign policy issues and humanitarian catastrophes of our lifetime, Syria, the agenda has been held hostage. The ability to push forward with a political solution, negotiations to bring about the kind of transition that would cause a lot of fighters to put down their weapons and focus now on terrorism and on state building and so forth. We're a long way from that because Russia is pursuing a totally different course that is very counterproductive. But on Iran, as I mentioned, Russia stood with us, not only in putting in place the toughest sanctions measures that we had seen, but then following through and standing by us as we push for tough requirements in the...
Yet they're standing with Iran in Syria.
Exactly, exactly. That's what I'm saying. I mean, but we continue to manage, a whole series of African crises where there's not that much obstructionism. They don't love sanctions, and I think the experience of being sanctioned over Ukraine and Crimea has made that sort of predisposition against sanctions even more acute. So that can make it challenging. But by and large, Syria and Ukraine, and now potentially Iraq, depending on how they move forward, I would put to one side, and the rest of our council agenda we're able to pursue. I would just say a word, if I could, about what I think leading with purpose in the fourth quarter particularly looks like. We need a strong multilateral means of building coalitions and dealing with the profound threats to peace and security that exist. And I view the perch that I'm privileged to have up in New York as a place where the institution just has to get stronger. There's so much free riding in the institution, countries that kind of sit back and say, let us know when you've dealt with Ebola, let us know when you've dealt with ISIL. Like, it just can't happen. Everybody has to chip in on the refugee crisis, which we see, the greatest displacement, the most heartbreaking scenes of families just driven to such despair that they're willing to trust smugglers and take their kids on these dinghies with these fake life jackets and so forth. That's how desperate they are. There has to be burden sharing.
That means helping make up for these funding shortfalls. That means committing more peacekeeping troops.
And it means looking at the architecture. It means new countries that have never taken refugees, never been open for business when it comes to resettlement, joining the European countries that are being overrun, joining the United States, which is going to get up to 100,000 refugees within a couple years, and as you know, over time has taken more refugees than anybody. But even we are looking at what more we can do and trying to build public and political support here for that. But between that and then trying to break through with people who've always in New York and in diplomacy generally kind of done things a certain way, and that's where the humanization comes in trying to break through on Syria chemical weapons, it wasn't enough to simply assert, hey, Russia, when chemical weapons are used, it's not in your interest. Like, those weapons will find their way to your country in the same way that they may to ours or elsewhere in the region. The United States mission brought into the Security Council the doctors who had actually treated people who'd been gassed with chlorine most recently, and we were able, in, again, a very polarized environment, to get Russia to agree to actually set up an investigative mechanism on chlorine. Now, what happens with that now that Russia's a much more active party to the conflict is a fair question. On Ebola, bringing in on the big screen from Liberia when the death predictions were 1.5 million by early 2015, having a health worker beamed in to the Security Council so people who are just reading their talking points, again, that they're getting from Capitol, suddenly have to look up and be faced with a health worker, who basically takes over the entire Security Council chamber on this large screen, and he says, if you don't act, my people are all going to be wiped out. And sort of forcing people to grapple with the individuals who are affected by our decisions, trying to project them into the venues that have grown a little stale over time. That's a big part of, I think, what the legacy of this administration will be, certainly at the UN, but I also think in our diplomacy generally, trying to make the individuals who are affected by our decisions more of a part of the foreign policy discussions, and trying to then shift what can be, again, pretty kind of broken systems and broken debates.
The example you brought up there of, I think Dr. Zahir Sahlul was one of the individuals.
Yes.
I had interviewed him as well after you spoke to him. And that was one way of forcing an issue that had fallen out of the headlines back into some focus by bringing him there to testify and humanizing, as you said there. But does humanizing, have you seen that add up to actually putting teeth into the policy?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Syria CW example, we were trying ahead of that session to get a mechanism, an OPCW-UN investigative mechanism to look into these allegations. We were failing, and then it just got untenable because, even if you can't immediately turn a particular country, if you turn everybody else, that isolation sometimes is something they don't want to withstand. And so I do think that's a concrete example. I think we just launched, it was the 20-year anniversary of the Beijing Women's Conference. Remember when Hillary went famously and said women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights? China was convening at the UN a celebration, Beijing Plus 20, but at the same time that they were hosting, President Xi was hosting this huge, kind of little bit of backslapping event. China and many countries around the world were locking up women, bloggers, lawyers, people protesting sexual harassment or people protesting, poor child safety or whatever on products. And nobody really in diplomatic circles was necessarily going to note that at this celebration of 20 years since Beijing. So we launched a campaign called Free the 20 in early September, where each day we posted a photograph up on the front wall of the U.S. mission, which is across from the UN, so all the diplomats had to walk past it, of a woman who'd been arrested basically for trying to speak her mind and trying to improve her society. And over the course of the 20 days, it didn't go over that well with the countries who were being featured. Three of the prisoners were Chinese, and we had the state visit coinciding with that, but this was something, again, the White House was very enthusiastic about, because again, even as we pursue cooperation, we also have to pursue areas of substantial difference. But over the course of the 20 days, each of the governments then were under more pressure than they otherwise would have been, not only from us, but from other countries that joined in supporting the call to release these women. And while I wish I could say that 19 of the 20 women were now, in their communities, back with their kids and their families, making their communities better, I can say that 2 were released over the life of the campaign. And so one in Egypt. Do you see a connection? I mean, I don't want to, a lot of effort for, in some cases, many months, but in many cases, many years have gone into each of these cases. But it's gratifying, at least, to see that pressure, I think, from all circles, whether from ours or from others, does pay off. And I think it's important to remember that, as sometimes people are inclined to say, oh, what good will it do? well, you know what, now there are two women who have a great contribution to make who are now, not behind bars.
I was told that you have to speak to your son's class relatively soon and tell them exactly what it is that you do at the United Nations.
This is totally traumatic.
A lot of people wonder, what happens inside that Midtown Manhattan building. What are you going to tell him? And what are you going to tell his classmates?
No. This is the worst thing. So I agreed to do this. So my son, as I've noted in other venues, is he has basically two obsessions: the Washington Nationals and Putin. So he's fine.
And that's totally because of you on both counts?
I'm a Red Sox fan, so I can't explain that. But the Putin thing, I have to explain my absences, right? So I'll come home and there's something about, he's into Star Wars, so I can draw analogies. I'm not going to specify what those analogies are. But in any event, but he's, we were in a cafe just this over Columbus weekend, right across from the UN, doing painting of pumpkins, and we're in line, I'm getting him a sandwich, and he goes, "Mommy, what happens if you criticize Putin in Russia?" And I just thought that was amazing, and I thought, well, yeah, it's different, it's harder, and he's like, "I'm so glad we live here," because he wants to remain free to be, having his little critical brain work. But this assembly,
and he's 6?
He's 6.
Okay.
But this assembly I agreed to because, of course, how could I not? It's my son's school, and he's in first grade, so it's 1st to 4th grade. But I had a staff meeting with my team yesterday, and I realized that, what does one say? So I said, well, maybe we could tell a good news story. I said, maybe I could tell them because I want to show how the system can work. So I said, maybe I could start with Ebola. And my staff was like, what are you talking about? You're going to go and, so I have to, now that I'm used to talking to my son and he's so interested in, I gotta.
You're going to give them nightmares.
I got to think about the other kids, right? So we're having like a big huddle, as they say in government. We're going to have a huddle tomorrow about what the contents of that speech are going to be, because I am clearly not reliable for that audience.
Well, I'm getting a sign that we are running out of time here. But I do want to ask you, how would you sum up what you've done so far? You said you've got 15 months left. You've said history is going to judge particularly the issue of Syria very harshly.
I don't know that those were my exact words, but it is I think the singular challenge, that and climate change. Climate change, where we have a lot of momentum going into Paris. Syria, where we've seen, a major setback with the Russians doubling down on a regime that is, by its methods, attracting far more threats to Syria than they are neutralizing. So I think those are atop the list, but I think the institutional changes and making the international community, which happens to be situated at the UN, but can exist also and exist sometimes more fruitfully elsewhere, we just got to get our tools and our game up here in the 21st century to deal with these threats that cross borders. We're not there yet. So substantial investment in the structures and the rules and the accountability to when those rules are broken.
A lot of work in the months ahead. Thank you very much for all of you listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you.